Well, good morning, everyone, wherever you might be. And it kind of takes your breath realizing that we're in England or in Australia all at the same time. That's quite a step for for a farm boy, you know. And here we are, as we are. But I do want to say, to begin with, thank you all very much for your prayers for those of us over in Montana. I hear voices. Does that come with this? All right. Anyway, sometimes we feel like we're on the Montana frontier over there, and there are a few of us that we gather every Sabbath, and we enjoy it very, very much. But I know it's been a lot of effort from this end, so all the AV people, thank you very much for your efforts in keeping these broadcasts going and feeding us every single Sabbath. And personally, I'd also like to express our gratitude on an individual basis, because as my mind runs through all the congregation over there, almost every one of us has been the beneficiary of your prayers, your concern at different times, or either an injury, a health situation, or whatever it might be. So just thank you very much. That's really been appreciated. Well, I'd like to share with you a subject that has been popping up in my life over the last 4 years. And it first came to focus, all right, back in 2016. Oh, you'll get a lot of that, all right. 2016, and so I've been speaking on this particular subject off and on. So let me ask you a question or two to get into it. How would you describe living water? Okay, now we all are familiar with water that has become brackish or still water. I know when I was a young fella, that was quite a while ago, over in Aswell, Washington. The Columbia flooded every single year, and it was beautiful at the time because it brought in fish and it brought in all kinds of things in the overflow. But then when the Columbia settled back down, it left big pools. Now that was wonderful for a short period of time, because as time went on, then the water became lifeless. The fish could not survive. So the opposite of living is stagnant or brackish, and eventually life in that particular kind of a water dies, it evaporates. Contrary, living water is active, and we've all had access to streams or rivers or out in the outdoors. And if you take a look at the water and listen to it, small streams, as they come down over the rocks and whatever's in their path, they kind of chuckle to you, they talk to you, they're alive. Then as they get bigger and more boisterous and they come crashing down in larger streams, there is a roaring, and you can't really talk to your neighbor or whoever is with you, your companion, because the water is so alive and so filled with energy that it just takes over. It just drowns out all sound. Well, living water oxygenates and becomes mineralized as it makes its way out of the mountains, and it forms the streams into rivers and so on, and we have then rivers of life. All right, now with that background, here's a statement I want to start with and I want to end with. When that red thing gets down there. All of the temples of God, okay, are cleansed, washed, made clean and beautiful and functional with the use of living water. Now this will apply to the physical temples of the past and the spiritual temples of the present. All right? Now, God has and does require living water to cleanse and energize all of his temples. So, okay, let me, how many of you had the privilege of being in Jerusalem? Ever visited Jerusalem? Well, there's a few hands. And so you're well, even if you only have the map of what I call the Jerusalem Ridge, you'll know what we're talking about. And we'll get to the handout here in just a minute, okay? Thought back here. So then you probably have visited Hezekiah's tunnel, right? And you walk through that cold water. I thought it was up to my ankles, but Connie says it was up to her knees. We had the privilege of going there. Our family was over now this is true, 1985. All right, you get that straight. Man, when you live a long time, you talk through generations. Anyway, now Hezekiah's tunnel the water there is supplied by the only fresh living water stream within 5 miles in any direction of Jerusalem. And that's key. That's a major point. There are other water supplies, but they are either wells or they come in by viaduct. The only active stream is there. Now, this is the Gihon, okay? Gihon. Now the Gihon stream today is a kitten, as it once was a lion. The roaring and the deliverance of the tons of living water from that particular siphon artesian type spring had enough force to drive the water up through 40 stories of that ridge from the Kidron Valley up into the temple of God, and then also supplied a spin-off of water that ran down into the Kidron Valley down south, okay? Now, Hezekiah walled off that water in 700 AD to keep it from going out into the Kidron and supplying any water for the Assyrians that were going to move in, okay? He sealed it off, and that's when he had this tunnel built that you walk through, those of you that did, of I think it's 1,735 feet from the Gihon area down underneath the ridge. It seems like the ancient peoples loved to dig in those rocks, and they used the rocks for fortifications, for defenses, and they lived in there, okay? But that meandering tunnel that they carved out went underneath the ridge and then comes out down at the pool of Siloam in the southern tip of that particular ridge. Now, what I'd like to do here, let me fill in why the Gihon is not producing today like it once did. In 1068, about that time there were 3 major earthquakes in that area, and the one in 1068, which killed about 25,000 Jews, also did something and crushed the Gihon's production. So it went from tons of water intermittently, I'll get to that, not get ahead of myself here. Intermittently during the day, it went to a constant stream, just kind of gurgling, to what we see today. Now, I have every hope and every expectation that God is going to open that spring up once again, and that's just my personal thing. But we'll take a look at some scriptures here in a moment as I get to it. Now, let me see. There's 3 things I'd like to accomplish, okay? A brief historical record of these waters is the source of it, the interaction with the Gihon water with the temples of Solomon, Zerubbabel, and the Herod temples. The focus I'll use today is the temple that was in the time of Christ and that was built by King Herod. Okay? Now, I'd like to include a few eyewitness reports of these temples and the fresh living water that cleansed them. All right? That's number one. Number two, I'd like to touch on several, I will touch on, like to, you know I'm going to do that. I want to touch on several millennial prophecies, just enough to give us a taste of what this living water, what it will be used, and how it will be used in restoring this planet. Okay? Thirdly, and what can we personally take away from this service this morning? Okay? Well, number one, you're finished on time, or not? Oh, okay. All right. To the handout. All right. Take a moment or two, and I like, you know, once you start writing and putting things together, then you also get into the editing business. I've edited this thing 3 times, and I still have to edit it again live here with you, okay? Oh, in the upper left-hand corner, Fort Antonia and the temple built by King Herod, 19 BCE to 64 BCE. No, 19 BC, or BCE simply means BC, and to 64 CE. Take the B out. In other words, AD, if you want to be Americanized. All right, so that's one. Then I'd like to have you then drop down over to the southeast corner in the green section where it says Gihon, and just make an arrow or something. The Gihon should actually be over on the line itself or just inside the temple area. Because we'll find history has said over and over again that this water came up in the southeast corner of the temple platform, okay? So I think that's about all the only corrections I need to make. But I will draw your attention into the drawing that is in the lower left-hand corner, which is actually a look at what the artist meant from the southern wall of the Roman Fort Antonia, right there where it says 964 feet, and from there south, the green area. So that's what that drawing is all about. Well, I'm sorry, that's not right. It also takes in Fort Antonia. But the Fort Antonia is that big expanse upwards or on top of the temple. All right, there is the Milo in between, which simply means backfill. All right, that's all that means. Now, okay, let's start with the Jewish area, the green area. All right. Now, I was surprised when I actually sat down and began to look at maps and legends, just how far or how much of a distance the Jerusalem Ridge was. In my mind, it was huge. It was big. No, it's less than 2/5 of a mile. It's a very small piece of real estate. But also, I want to draw your attention to the scriptures that we've been going through here, even at the feast, where God says, "I will dwell where? In the middle of my people." So the temple, the true temple mount, okay, is in the middle of the people. All right, now, one thing I forgot. I know I'm going to be pushing the envelope a little bit. Some of you are not acquainted with any of this information. Some of you a little bit. But probably all of you, or most of you, will have questions, and you'll wonder from time to time, does he know what he's talking about? Well, I have quite a bit of backup here from historians and from eyewitnesses of the material I'm going to present to you. All I want is for God's people to take a look at, to see what God very possibly will do. I feel he will do it, but possibly do it. All right? That he is going to return and he's going to establish a temple. So this has some bearing on what is in the future. Somewhere, sometime, Ezekiel's temple will be built, will it not? And there will be sacrifices, will there not? Will they need living water to cleanse that temple? Yes, they will. Okay, now, if God has another opinion, he'll let us know. But this is the presumption I'm moving ahead with, and why I am bringing this material today. All right, because the Roman Fort Antonia, up to the top, is today labeled what? The Temple Mount. The Temple Mount. How many people believe that? Most everybody. But you know, it's only been the last 800 years that people have believed that from the historical accounts. All right. Is God opening up a few doors? Well, we'll see. No, I'm not a light bringer. I'm not trying to put myself in that position. But this became so evident with the focus study. All right. What can I tell you? Well, take a look at the green area again. It is 600 feet from Fort Antonia down to the north wall of the temple platform. Now, on every platform that was built, the temple was built and put on that platform. Solomon's and Herod's were almost identical, okay? Now, 600 feet from the northern border of the Temple Mount, Temple Platform to the south. And if you multiply 600 times 600, you come up with 8.2 acres. Now, when I say sometimes truth is hidden in plain sight, take a look at if this is 8.2 acres, okay? And I think we can move on from there. All right. Now let's go up to the huge expanse or the fort up north of this. Now, one other thing. Just one more thing. Every time I say that, I think of Mr. Berg, or Wilberg. Oh, just one more thing. That's great. I don't think he borrowed that from Colombo either. You know, I think that's an original. All right, 600. All right. Glen settled in here. 600 by 600 or 8.2 acres. Now, when we go north here, I know. It is a perfect square. A perfect square. I mean, how often do you find God is using perfect squares? Even in New Jerusalem, it's a perfect cube, square, up and down, around. And this keeps popping up all the time, okay, in the instruction that we receive. Now let's go up to the fort, and this is the time of King Herod and Jesus Christ. Okay, this is the time element. Now, this Roman fort up there was started 150 years prior to Herod's time by Simon the Hasmonean. Now, he was a Jew, and he was a priest, and he was also the king, so he had total dictatorial power, and that's quite a study in itself, so I'll just leave it at that. But he's the one who started a fortification right there where it says 924 feet, just about in that area, and it was called the Basil, Basil. It was the beginning of a fortification, and he built that to protect the northern part of the temple platform. All right? Now, the Romans came in shortly after that, after they run the Greeks out, and the Romans came in, and they took over, and it was Herod who finished building this immense Roman fortification up there. He also built the temple of God. All right? He tore down the one that was there and built the temple that the apostles and Christ walked in and preached from and so forth. Now, a few statistics, like I say, it's right here in plain sight. I didn't see it till this last year. The measurement across the bottom of that fort, 924 feet. The top, west to east, is roughly 140 feet. The left or the west side is 1,610 feet, and the right, and you can, by the way, you can get this off of Google if you want, 1,551 feet. This is common knowledge in many areas, all right? Now, number one, this is anything but a square. It's a trapezoid. Difference between that and the Temple Mount or the temple platform, one's a trapezoid, one's a square. Now, how about the acreage? 36 acres up there. Why did it have to be so big? Well, I'm glad you asked. It housed, at the time of Herod and Christ, the 10th legion of the Roman army, okay? What's a legion? 6,000 men. They had their support people, they had their officers' quarters, they had their pagan temples, they had their, well, everything was up there. They had, according to Josephus, they had 37 cisterns up there, but they got their water not from the Gihon. They got their water from Bethlehem, 5 miles to the south, and they piped it in by viaduct, and that's what the Romans used. But it was as Josephus also said, it looked like there's room up there for 2 cities. It was an immense amount of real estate, and it is a magnificent edifice. But somewhere down through the ages, the Dome of the Rock got labeled the holy place, and the holy place ended up being the temple of God. Now, I can't go into all of that today. Well, I could, but then again, you'd like to get lunch and supper. But it is a fascinating story, and all of this is available. I'm going to try to introduce a little bit more of this material with the elders and see how viable it is for the congregation, okay? And it's all right there. And I've got a long list of resources if anyone wants to become involved in it. And as I think Mr. Mickelson said, or Mark Mickelson said, we're all on the email or on the web page. Write to us, criticize, send, whatever. We love to be vetted. I do. To me, there is safety in that. All right? Okay. I just wanted to pass that on. Well, I think I better leave that. Now, you might want to know what that white strip is just below the Roman fort down into the Jewish area. Well, if you look at that picture, that sketch at the lower left-hand corner, you will see between the fort and between the temple platform on the west side are colonnades. They were 35 feet wide, and the Romans insisted that they be placed there so they could come out of the fort and quell any kind of riot or disturbance going on in the temple, and the Jews were doing something at one time or the other. And if you'll go back to, and just in your memory, remember the Apostle Paul when he was out there and the Jews were rioting and they're about to tear him apart, and all of a sudden there's soldiers there? Where'd they come from? Well, right over there in the fort. They did that so they had quick access to the Jews. Now, they tried to keep hands off to much as they could, but usually there was some kind of commotion, and they wanted quick access to any of those areas. Anyway, okay, I'll put that over there. It's so, all right. Oh, I just was with that appeal to write, to ask questions, and so on. Just let me slip in the scripture in Acts 17:11. the Bereans listened. And then the second part of that, they said, now we're going to see if that's so or not. Well, that is the open invitation, okay? That's the open invitation. I hope you will use it, because there is power in our numbers. Every one of us has God residing, or those that are converted, has God residing in them. And as we study and as the thoughts come and we share those, because everyone has a blind side, honestly. Even some of those of us that would rather not have them. But we need input, okay? Because we're all going to move together in a group. All right. So that's end of commercials, all right? But you read that verse there in verse 11 of chapter 17. Now, recorded by Josephus. So we're not through with the outline yet. According to Josephus, which was an incredible historian, who he was Jewish, but he also served the Romans, and they gave him all the records. Josephus collected or was given all of the records of the Jews before they finally burnt and totally devastated Jerusalem. Okay, the temple and all. Those records were given to Josephus. He then also had his own writings and his own records and so forth. So he had quite an arsenal of information. Now, recorded by Josephus, historically and presently, the location, and I say presently because it's still there, that fort is still there after 2,000 years. And one of the comments I would make, there's not a burn mark on a stone. Jerusalem died by fire. The temple was torn apart. As Jesus Christ said in Matthew 24, verse 2, every single stone in that area would be torn down and gotten rid of. And it was. But that's the history that's been blanked out, but it's still there in the records. But anyway, okay. Sometimes I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. Okay. Josephus said, historically and presently, the location of this fresh spring or living water, and that's why they labeled it living water, is 1,000 feet south of the southeast corner of the present day Temple Mount, and that's the last time I'll refer to it. It's Fort Antonia. Now, how did that fort get its name? That's also a good question. Who built it? Herod. He was a Roman. He was also a soldier. Mark Antony was his hero. So he named that edifice up there after Mark Antony, so that's how it got its name, Antonia. The Muslims today call it the Haram el-Sharif. And they just refer to it usually as the Haram. Okay? And if you talk to the Jews over there, they say, oh yeah, there's a Haram. Some of them. Now, not the it's interesting. Oh boy, there goes the script. The old traditional Jews have bought into the temple, the fort as the location of the temple. But there is a growing and a swelling group of individuals over there now that are doing a tremendous amount of excavation work, and they're down to the level of Solomon's temple. That'll come up a little bit later. But it just is sometimes on my mind. I'd like to tell you about it. But he says, the present location of the spring water, the living water, is 1,000 feet south of the southeast corner of the present day, Haram or Temple Mount. And if you look up there, southeast corner, come down through the green, and which is 600 feet, another almost 600 feet, say about 400 feet into the temple area, what do you know? There's the Gihon, living water. Now, this is what Josephus, the historian, said. Today, this spring supplies the water that courses through Hezekiah's tunnel, and it does, and you can draw your own little tunnel area underneath that peninsula down to the pool of Siloam. Okay? Now, the particular characteristics of the stream, I did want to focus on the water. The living water that was required by God to keep the temple clean and beautified. Oh yeah, as it was mentioned, made a real point of in the sermonette, when you do something, you do it well. You go after it. So that the temple of God had to be cleaned every day after the sacrifices. There also had to be sufficient water, clean, living water, for the priests and to be purified. And they sometimes changed clothes several times a day. So there was a continuous supply. I want to emphasize the amount of water that is needed, and I will get to that. Okay. Now, there was an Egyptian historian named Aristeas, Aristeas or Aristus, okay? He's an Egyptian historian of note, and in 300 BC, 300 years before the temple, Herod's temple was built, there is an this is a quote, there is an inexhaustible reservoir of water as would be expected from an abundant spring gushing up naturally from within the temple. And the rest of that quote is on page 284 of the Temples at Jerusalem Forgot by Dr. Ernest L. Martin. Now, 300 years from that time into the ADs, just before the destruction of Herod's temple, Tacitus, a Roman historian this time, in Jerusalem, just before its destruction, as I said, quote, the temple resembled a citadel. Now, citadel is a fortress. The temples were armed. I mean, they were armed to the teeth because it usually had to protect itself. Okay. He said the temple resembled a citadel and had its own walls, which were more laboriously constructed than the others. Even the colonnades with which it was surrounded formed an admirable outwork. In their terminology, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous building. All right? It contained an inexhaustible spring. There were subterranean excavations in the hills and tanks and cisterns for holding rainwater. Goes on, the founders of the state, the way he put it, had foreseen that frequent wars would result from the singularity of its customs, like the Sabbath, the holy days, monotheism in a pagan world, and so had made every provision against the most protracted siege. And it was amazing how long the Jews held out in Jerusalem. And that war started in 66 AD, and Jerusalem didn't fall till 70. Masada did not fall until 73. I want to give you a quote by that commander here in just a moment. And it was armed, and they were tough. But the Romans finally pushed through from the north, across those walkways, and up. Once they breached that wall, then the rest of the city of Jerusalem went. According to Josephus, they destroyed everything that was Jewish, not just the temple. Okay, according to Josephus. All right, now, so that's where the core of that I wanted to share with you. There is quite sufficient as far as eyewitnesses. The list is immense. Some are Egyptian, some are Roman, some are Jewish, some from all different parts of the world. Some were Christians later on, and they all had their comments when they went to Jerusalem to see it, okay? Now, I'd like to, wait a minute, Glenn. I did this earlier. I'm supposed to turn this over Got the notes on the back too. You would be cheated out of 30%. No, right? Okay, the Gihon. Let me drop back to the Gihon. The Gihon was an artesian-like siphon spring. Okay, now what's that mean? Well, it means, and we all are familiar with old, in Yellowstone, Old Faithful, where she would blow. Okay, she would, now, that was predictable. When I was a kid, what was it, every hour on the hour, old Faithful did his thing? Well, it is not as faithful anymore. All right. That's a kind of a bum way to compare the two, so let me elaborate a little bit more. We're all familiar with artesian-like springs, which bubble up out of the ground and they just bubble forever. This particular stream was a siphon spring. Now, we can draw you pictures to show you that, but what it did, it balled up water within the rocks themselves, huge amounts of water, and then there was an inverted U coming out. Now, this is all natural channels, okay? And once that water in that pool built up, and it took sometimes an hour, sometimes a half a day, it was intermittent, but it would build up, and then it would start over into that inverted U, and once it started, just like, and you've all done it, I'm sure, sucked on a garden hose and pulled water out of one pail to another, or whatever, gasoline out of your car. And as long as it was running, it pulled that water out of that pool until it got low enough, broke the suction. Siphon-like spring. Now, but it was intermittent, okay? Sometimes it would happen twice a day, sometimes 5 times a day. In the dry seasons, sometimes maybe once a day or once every 2 days. It was intermittent. All right. Now, it's the figures I got. It's one of the 27 in the world. Other reports have been 1 in every 16, or there's 16 of them in the 25. I don't know. There's a few. There's a few of them. And this water, again, came up with enough force, with enough volume behind it to come crashing down within 30 feet of the floor of the Kidron Valley, and it'll go up 400 feet into the temple. Like I say, she was a lion in her day. It's a kitten right now. But there's some prophecies that might change a little bit. Oh boy. Okay, let me give you a little bit of history on that. Let's go back to 1 Chronicles 11. Kings, Chronicles. This is a story that you're likely to be familiar with it. 1 Chronicles 11. When David first came into this land, or this area, there was already a fortress built. It was, and it was by the Jebusites, the people of the land, the Canaanites. There were one tribe of the Canaanites. They had already had a fortress built, and it was also built down over the ridge, down to protect the water, this water source. Now, when David was brought into that area, he took a look at it and he said, we need that. So he made them a proposition, and if I get to it here, 1 Chronicles 11, verse 4, they made fun of him. Says, David, you're not coming in here. I think verse 4, and David and all Israel went to Jerusalem, which is Jebus. All right, this was the earlier name of Jerusalem, which the Jebusites, where the Jebusites were, the inhabitants of the land. And the inhabitants of Jebus said to David, you shall not come in here, or hither, I'm paraphrasing. This is the King James, starts out with the King James, I'm paraphrasing. You shall not come in here. Nevertheless, David took the castle of Zion, which is the city of David, or in the city of David. David said, well, he made this deal with his troops. He said, okay, this is going to be a tough nut to crack. We can't get in there. But he told his men, now, if you find a way in here, I'll make whoever does this the commander of my army. All right? And verse 6 says, Joab. Last line there. So Joab, the son of Zeruiah, went first and was chief. And David dwelt in, well, it says castle in the King James, in Zion's. Okay, in Zion, where they called the city of David. Now the story behind that is that the Jebusites said, David, if we just have a youngster in here or an old man, that's enough defense. We'll keep you out. Well, most of you know how they got in there. They went up where? When the Gihon wasn't pushing water, they figured that out. They went up the tunnel, got into the fortress, and interestingly enough, the Jebusites weren't slaughtered, nor did they fight. They said, okay, David, you're here, you got it, we quit, we're friends. Interesting, I don't know what the background of that was. No. So that's how David acquired that area, and the water rights, if you please, to the Gihon Spring. All right, and that was about approximately 1000 BCE or BC. Now the temple, and this is something that I tried to work through, and I'll put it out there, and if some of you can figure these figures out for me and send me an email, I'd appreciate it. But in 1 Chronicles 23, David divided the Levites and the priests into 24 orders. Now I understand the 24 orders and the number of men. In other words, he brought the priests, he brought the Levites on as shift workers. As much as I can distill out of that, out of the thousands, there were several thousand men on duty at any one given time. Now, if they came in for a week and were off 23, and they repeated that throughout the year. But in that group that came in during that week, did they divide it up into each day or something? You take this group and so on. I don't know. But if you would want to figure those numbers out, I couldn't make them gel. There's over 24,000 priests and 24,000 Levites to service this temple, the temple, the first temple that was going to be built. Now, let me emphasize here. I'll just leave that as a question and homework for anybody who wants to take it on. All right, 2 Chronicles 7:5. Okay, and 1 Kings 8 and verse 63. Okay, 2 Chronicles 7:5, 1 Kings 8 and verse 63. Now, I'll kind of skip through this because some people are a little bit squeamish, but I want to emphasize at the dedication how many animals were slaughtered. And if we only equate the amount of water with the blood that was shed, it is enormous. Okay, let me move through this. Okay, it states that the slaughter of 22,000 oxen were offered at that dedication, 120,000 sheep. Now, an ox, a full-grown animal like that, has 10 gallons of, if you don't like blood, okay, body fluid. A sheep has a gallon. You add those together, you come up, and I assume it took about a week for that dedication to run its course. There was 340,000 gallons of blood to flush out of the temple, all right? Because the temple was kept meticulous, all right? Now, what kind of comparison can we use there? Well, a large tank, you see these large tanker trucks around here pulled by a diesel tractor, okay, the kind that hook up to a box, and we call them 18-wheelers, okay? Every so often there's this huge tanker that they pull around, sometimes full of water, sometimes full of cooking oil or gasoline. It depends on what they're using. Those tankers are about 11,000 gallons apiece, the big ones, okay? So when you do the math, you put it all together, it would take 4 tanker trailers a day, 44,000 gallons of water, to match the amount of sacrificial blood that was spilled daily if, in fact, the dedication ran a week. Okay, all I'm trying to do is see the need for prodigious amounts of water, living water, to cleanse the temples, physical, and I think we'll see a little bit about the spiritual. All right. Now, we got through that without exciting too many people. All right. I just want to put in a little bit of a note here about the present excavations going on your outline there, where it says temple. That's where the recent excavations are focusing. And the Jewish Antiquities Society, which is kind of in charge of this, and the government and so on, they have gone down now about 3 levels. The first level, obviously, there isn't a thing there, because when Jesus Christ said every stone would be removed, he meant what he said. That top layer is gone. It was burnt, it was beat up, it was all the rocks, all the stone was taken out of there, moved over to the West Bank, and so on. Okay, now, wherever else it went. Now, the second level, Zerubbabel, they got down through that debris. Now they got down, and the latest finds, within the last year or so, they have found the sewer system, the gutters, the tethering places where the sacrificial animals were tied up, and I think they found 4 of the tables, well, butchering tables that the Levites used to cut up the sacrifices. It's all right there, and the picture's taken of it. It's easy to take. You can find it, and if you need to know a source, well, come and see me. I'll give you several. But it's there. What I'm saying, things are coming to light, and with God's opening our minds, we're going to see what's been hidden in plain sight. All right? How long did we read the Bible? I'm not comparing the 2 subjects today. God and Christ in history, or in a record in the scriptures. How long did we read over those scriptures? Until God said, okay, time, blink, and look how it spread. All right, anyway, well, that's a repetition there, and old red-eye back there's blinking at me, and it's not in the panic mode yet, so. No, I really appreciate that. Because if I was looking around for a wristwatch like in the old days, never find it. Would forget it's even up here. All right. All right, I gave you okay, let's jump into the future just real quick. And here's a taste. Now, how about Joel 3? Joel 3, still in the King James. Hosea, Joel. Joel 3, and we can pick it up. Okay. Now, the time setting here, of course, is the 7 last plagues, is the building up then to Armageddon, and yeah, verse 5. Well, just to set the stage here, the sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. So we're into the tail end of the day of the Lord, and the Lord, all caps, Yahweh, shall roar out of Zion. Not pussyfoot. He's going to roar out of Zion, utter his voice from Jerusalem. The heavens and the earth will shake, but Yahweh, the Lord, will be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. So shall you know that I am the Yahweh, your Elohim, dwelling in Zion. And Zion is going to be reestablished here. Right now, if you look on your Bible maps, where's Zion? Way over there. That was renamed by, who was that? Anyways, right after the destruction of the temple, and they named it Zion. Well, it's the wrong place. Okay. You shall know that I am the eternal, or the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain, okay? Then shall Jerusalem, because that whole area, Jerusalem area within there is Zion, okay? Then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall no more strangers pass through her anymore. Okay, now, verse 18. And it shall come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drop down new wine. So we're getting into the new heavens and new earth, into the millennium, okay, area. And the mountains shall drop down new wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters. And a fountain shall come forth of or within the house of the Eternal, Yahweh, and shall water the valley of Shittim. Now, that is an area, if you go right outside of Jerusalem and you go north through the Jordan Rift, you'll find that area up there is kind of a county, and there's a couple of towns in there. All right? Now, I almost hesitate to turn to poor old Zechariah 14 again. We've been there so many times, but let's do it. All right? And you just remember everything we've read in there so far, but in Zechariah 14, in the middle of the chapter, and again, I'm trying to focus now on the water aspect, and we pick it up in verse 8. And it shall be in that day that living water, okay? Translators, this was what was given in the Hebrew. They didn't say just water or living water shall go forth from Jerusalem, half of it toward the former sea, and half of it toward the hinter sea, in other words, down toward the Dead Sea or the Salt Sea. The other half will curl around and go up and head for the Mediterranean somehow or the other, and half of them toward the hinter sea. In summer and winter shall it be. All right. Now at this juncture you can plug in Ezekiel 47, or actually 40 through 48, but 47 talks about the use and the need in the sacrificial area of living water. Well, actually, Ezekiel starts that way in chapter 40. Okay, but I have to leave that because I have almost overextended my time, and I do want to get to the conclusion. Revelation 22. All of this is talking about the same period of time. In chapter 22, the revelation to John, he wrote it this way, and he showed me, okay, the messenger showed John a pure river of life, a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out from the throne or the temple of God and of the Lamb. So, the need for water and that growth and the earth to be reconstituted, it's all there. Now, let me wind this up, come to the third point. What can you take away from this? All right. I hope it's been clear up to this point. Well, let me preface this third point with the scripture in 2 Corinthians 4:16. Now, I like that scripture because as mathematics, 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. 2, 4, 16. 2 Corinthians 4:16. What's it say? We are restored daily. We are renewed daily. So the need for living water, as it were, to the people of God is on a daily basis. And he'll tie this in with the Spirit. He'll tie it in with study. And one of the major themes I think that has evolved here at this festival is willingness to learn, willingness to investigate, to study. And each one of us, in the old days, and hope they're gone forever, we used to wait, and I think it was Terry mentioned this in the sermon yesterday. New information comes down from the apostle, and then you can go forth. That was a tenor. Well, if in fact, and it is a fact, in John 14, verse 23, where the Father and the Christ dwell in us, well, they're fully capable of reading, understanding, and digesting the Scriptures, all right? So please do not minimize your capability to read, to understand, to synthesize, and then hopefully spark your brother. And I hope I'm one of them, okay? Oh yeah, all of us can have input. No. All right, well, I gave you that principle. Let me give you another one. Oh, I have time to read this. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 3. Now, you know where I'm going on this one. 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 16. Since each one of us has the Spirit of the Father, and He and Jesus Christ is living within us, we are, and it says here in 1 Corinthians 3, and the Apostle Paul uses, and again, this has been used before, okay? Know you not, or don't you realize that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? So as we are all a part or a piece of that temple that's being formed. Now, he also then emphasizes that once again in chapter 6 of 1 Corinthians, and we're still in the King James, 6 and verse 19. And the Apostle Paul repeats himself. What? Don't you know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, which is in you, which you have of or from God, and you are not your own? And he goes on, we're bought with a price. But we're an intrinsic part of this temple. And do we need water to keep us clean and beautiful and functional? Well, don't go away. Let's turn with me to John 4. I'll use the New Living Translation on this. It's a beautifully written. Now this is the chapter where Jesus went into the Samaritan village. They were on their way to the coast, and the disciples went into town to get some food or whatever. And he just had a moment, so he sat down by a well there. And this was a Samaritan village, okay? And usually the Samaritans and the Jews didn't even talk. And this lady was kind of surprised that when she came up to the well to get some water, that actually this Jew, Jesus Christ, spoke to her. All right, that's in verse 4. Well, he had to go through Samaria on the way. Eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph, and so on. Then he goes through the story. And as he sat down, verse 7, soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, he knows how to start a conversation, would you please draw me a little water so I can have a drink? All right. And the woman, verse 9, was surprised. The Jews don't have anything to do with Samaritans. And they had a discussion back and forth. She asked, why are you asking me for a drink? Jesus replied, verse 10, if you only knew the gift of God, if you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me for a drink, and I could give you, or would give you, living water. All right. Now, and then she didn't pick up, so she went right back to the well and getting some water out of there. In verse 13 and 14 here, Jesus replied, anyone who drinks this water, this well water, will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. And the water, this is beautiful how it's written, becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them, and the King James says, welling up within them to eternal life. It may be poetic, but it's just beautifully written and very descriptive. All right. Now, interestingly enough, Isaiah 12. This is actually a quote from Isaiah 12. And let me hasten back there. And verse 3. I'm in Isaiah. I'm getting close. Okay. Isaiah 12. I like to read verses 2 and 3. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid, for the Lord Jehovah is my strength and my song. He also is become my salvation. Therefore, with joy shall you draw water out of the wells of salvation. The terminology back to water, its source, and the need for it. It begins to connect these elements and remind us that the replenishing of God's Spirit and the need to study is as great of a need as we have for physical water to sustain life. Okay? Because you can go quite a while without food in the wilderness, but you won't go very far without water. Maybe 2 days, and then things begin to happen. Now, I got two scriptures, okay? John 7, let me just talk to you about that one. John 7, verse 37 says, on the last great day of the feast. Now, I don't want to get into, is it the late in the seventh day or early in the eighth day? That's not my point here. On that day, at the conclusion of the feast and over into the eighth day, there was a ceremony in Jerusalem, and the priest would go down to, and I believe it's a Gihon. It says Siloam. Later on, Gihon was named Siloam. Okay, the waterways or waterworks of Siloam. Anyway, the priest would go down and they would have a golden vase, any number of them, and they would fill it with water. And as they walked back up into the temple, they would be chanting, I think it's Psalms 43 through Psalms 48. They would be singing those songs. So the connection with water and living water with this festival, especially you might say the tail end of it, and whatnot, to emphasize that life is going to come out of this again, and it's a necessary part. Now, let's turn to Ephesians 5, last scripture, honest. Ephesians 5. And there is an analogy here by the Apostle Paul as well. Come on, okay. This chapter, as we all know, verse 31 is the capstone, and it relates Jesus Christ to the bride, okay, in this relationship. So then we go back, and within the chapter itself, it talks about husbands and wives as to exemplify that relationship. So let me pick out two verses here. Verse 25, so husbands husbands love your wives, or Jesus Christ loved your coming bride, the ecclesia, okay? Therefore, husbands love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church, or the ecclesia is the proper word there. It means the called out ones. That he might sanctify and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify to set apart for a holy use, he might sanctify and cleanse it, who? The ecclesia, with the washing of water by the word. To me, that is powerful, and I know it is to you as well. We need God's Spirit, obviously, but we need to study. It's our life's blood. It's what keeps us going. It's the energy, okay? And it keeps on shaping us. So we are washed by the water of the Word And as a member of the bride of Christ, we're also an intrinsic part of the temple of God, are we not? So let me then close with the same statement I started with. All of the temples of God are washed, cleansed, made clean, and beautiful with the use of living water. Physical temples of the past and the spiritual temples of today.